Hey guys, what's going on? So I think there's been a lot of interesting upsets in week 2, especially against some really good teams. So starting with the Minnesota Vikings beating the 49ers at home. Their week 1 performance I think was strong, but they didn't get a ton of attention from it because it was the New York Giants, but still 2-0 going into the season. However, they are going to have a pretty tough test against the Texans next week. So I think that will ultimately show us where they're going to be at. But looking at their team, Sam Darnold looks to be playing extremely well and likely has earned a spot as their new franchise quarterback, at least for now or for a few years if he's able to keep this going. And I really think that is a solid foundation to really utilize a lot of their offensive weapons. You have Justin Jefferson, who's easily one of the best wide receivers in the league. In addition to Addison, when he's healthy, same thing with Hawkinson. If they're able to get him back by the end of the season, I really think they're going to be a dangerous team, but really still have a lot of offensive weapons right now, even with those injuries. And I think you have a really good running combination with Jones and Chandler. And on top of that, I think what really solidifies the Vikings is a strong defense. I'd say just by the looks of things right now, they definitely have the potential to come up on top of being one of the best defenses in the NFL for this year. So I actually could see them getting first place in the NFC North. You do have a lot of competition with the Lions and the Packers, but the Lions losing to the Buccaneers I think is a little bit concerning for them. And you also have the Packers, who should be in it by the looks of things, but just given Jordan Love's injury, I think that's really going to put them back. So if the Vikings aren't able to finish in first place, I think they are likely a top wildcard contender for this division, or just in general to make the playoffs. And then next, I would have the Los Angeles Chargers, who have their win against the Panthers. But their win against the Raiders, while originally didn't look too impressive, since the Raiders did just upset the Ravens, I think that does make the Chargers look a lot better. And then, of course, you have Jim Harbaugh starting his coaching season out there. So that's definitely promising. And he's really proven himself at Michigan and with the 49ers before that. So I think with a healthy Justin Herbert, you're definitely going to have a competitive season for them. I really do think, though, we need to see some tougher tests in terms of opponents for the Chargers to really put them on that high pedestal. They are going to play the Steelers next, so I don't think that's too much of a tough test there. They're likely going to go 3-0 after this week. I think we'll ultimately see where they're at with the Chiefs in week 4, and I think that's really going to be a better indicator of their potential for this season. I don't think they'll be able to beat out the Chiefs for first place, but more than likely will get a wild card spot there. You also have to note that the Chiefs losing Isaiah Pacheco could be a serious concern for this season. So it is really possible that the Chargers could come up on top. We're really going to have to see there. And then next, following the Chargers, I would have the Oakland Raiders. They are 1-1, but I really think they have gained a lot of attention from beating the Baltimore Ravens. They did lose to the Chargers in week 1, so I think they are still a step down from them. But I do think the Raiders have a really underrated defense. I think they just really couldn't get going offensively in week 1. And I think against the Ravens, you do have a lot more of a promising performance from Minshew, and you do have some weapons in terms of Devontae Adams and now Brock Bowers. I think besides that, you don't really have anything too consistent in terms of their talent that could make for an impressive turnaround season. And I really don't think their running game has been that consistent. They do play the Panthers next, so that's likely going to be an easy win in their favor. And you also have to note that they did upset the Chiefs last year, even though the Chiefs were the Super Bowl champions and they weren't able to make the playoffs. So I think it's likely you could get that this year after a lot of games play out. And then after the Monday night game, I think all eyes are on the Atlanta Falcons. And while they did have a pretty slow start in week 1, just falling short to the Steelers, I think how they performed with the Eagles is really where a lot of the excitement going into this season for the Falcons is finally shown. So for the Eagles being a potential playoff team this year, I definitely think that gives the Falcons a promising outlook for the rest of this season. I think now it looks like Kirk Cousins is a little bit more settled in, potentially after some injury rust from missing a lot of games last year, and then just finally getting a little bit more comfortable with the Falcons. And I do think they have a pretty solid team with Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and even Ray McCloud. And I think they really had a good defensive performance against the Eagles, but they are going to be playing the Kansas City Chiefs next, and I think that's definitely going to be a tough game for them. But if the Chiefs play like they did against the Bengals, it's possible you have the Falcons pulling off another late win against them. So I definitely think that's going to get a lot of people talking, and that would be a really good indicator for their chances even in the playoffs this year. And I think in terms of the NFC South, that really is looking like an interesting division. You possibly even have 3 teams who could get a wild card spot, but I think in the long run, it is going to be tough to compete with the Saints and the Buccaneers, and probably only 2 out of those 3 are going to make the playoffs, so it's really tough to say where they're all going to come in at. And then next, the New Orleans Saints, 2-0. I think their week 1 performance against the Panthers really isn't too much to show from, but upsetting the Cowboys, I think, really shows that the Saints mean business this year. And they didn't just beat the Cowboys, it was an absolute blowout. So you have Derek Carr really being on fire. Alvin Kamara has been as good as he's ever been. And then I think you really have Shaheed and Olave looking to be as good as any other powerhouse wide receiver duo in the NFL. They are playing Philadelphia next week, so I think that's another good test. I think if they are able to beat the Eagles, then there's really going to be a lot of talk about the Saints' potential for this year, and especially if they're able to keep playing as electric as they have the first 2 weeks. I think they're really going to be a scary team to face. You do have a lot of, again, competition in the NFC South, so if they do go on a little bit of a slump, it's possible they could just get a wild card spot. And then I also have the Seattle Seahawks, and while they are 2-0, I don't think they are as impressive as some of these other teams here on this list. And I think this is really because they have only beat the Patriots and the Broncos. You do have to note that the Patriots did upset the Bengals in week 1, and the Bengals were neck and neck with the Chiefs. But I think the Seahawks have pretty much the same team as they did last year, and I don't think they've shown really enough in these first 2 games that they are going to be a really good team in the long run here. You have a lot of low-scoring games so far, so I think that's maybe a testament to their defense, but against a lot tougher competition, I don't think they're going to be able to handle their own. They do play the Dolphins next week, which I think is a little bit of a lucky break for them because you aren't going to have Tagovailoa in there. So they easily could go 3-0 after this week, but you're really in an extremely competitive NFC West this year. I really could see any 4 of these teams finishing on top. I would have to say I don't think that's going to be the Seahawks though, and the Rams I think definitely had the potential to, but given a lot of their recent injuries, I think that's definitely going to hurt them. So most likely, if I had to pick 2 right now, I would go with the 49ers and the Cardinals, but really anything could happen, and the Seahawks are still 2-0. And then following the Seahawks, I do have the Arizona Cardinals. I think, again, this is one team that did garner a lot of excitement going into this year, but they just haven't been as competitive in the past few years. They did lose to the Bills in the first week, but I think the Bills really being pretty tough competition, and the Cardinals hanging with them a lot of the game. The Cardinals easily could have come on top of that, so I really don't think that loss hurts them that much. And then they did beat the Rams pretty convincingly in week 2, so you definitely have to put the Cardinals up there with a lot of the top teams for this season. I think you do also have to note that a lot of the Rams injuries could have hindered them in that game, but it still was a pretty comfortable win. So I think now you have Marvin Harrison Jr. really coming alive last week, in addition to Kyler Murray, who's looking solid and can also run a little bit. And then, of course, you have James Conner and Trey McBride. So a really good offense there. I don't think their defense is as impressive. They are playing the Lions next week, so I think that's going to be a tough test for them. If they are able to beat the Lions, I think definitely the Cardinals are going to be a great team this season. And I think more than likely they will get the wild card spot behind the 49ers this year. And then last but not least, I probably would have them as one of the more impressive teams out of this list would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were a playoff team last year, but I don't really think they have been talked about too much in terms of their chances for this season. I think you have an impressive week 1 victory against the Commanders, and now beating the Detroit Lions I think is extremely impressive. I think when they played in the playoffs, the Buccaneers weren't too far off from them, but the Lions did pull away. So this win here is really promising. I think they have a great all-around team with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. I would say Rachaad White hasn't been as impressive, but still a top-level running back. They are playing the Broncos next, so that's likely going to be another win. And I do see the Buccaneers probably finishing first in the NFC South again. Those games against both the Falcons and the Saints I think are going to be really interesting, and a lot could happen there. So those would be the 8 teams I think are going to be interesting to watch. But feel free to let me know your thoughts on these teams, on these interesting upsets. Really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you later.